Greetings, Crocodile Army. The subject of same-sex marriage is one that seems to have such obvious conclusions at this point that I wasn't even sure if I wanted to make a video about it right now, despite it being in the news because of last week's Supreme Court activity. It's not exactly a cutting-edge topic when nearly everyone I know is in favor of it, or at least not opposed to it, and it seems like such a no-brainer in 2013. It wasn't always this way, though. When I first heard about this debate about 10 years ago, it was not nearly so obvious, and it took people a while to figure out their position on this. Politicians were even slower to react, even Democrats who would naturally be more inclined to allow it. But eventually, once they looked around them and saw they had enough support, they went ahead and spoke out in favor of it too, like Obama finally did last year. Whether out of principle or politics, they came to the sensible decision. And now even many Republicans are starting to realize that clinging to this issue is a surefire way for election losses, and are changing their minds. Politicians call this a position that has evolved, never a flip-flop. It may actually surprise you to know that 10 years ago my position evolved too, to get me to where I am today on the subject. I was actually skeptical about it when I first heard of the issue around 2003 or so. For several months at least, I was actually for civil unions, but leaned against same-sex marriage. My reasons were very flimsy, and mostly were because I didn't think most gay people wanted it, and I didn't want it to lead to even more votes for Republicans, who were politically dominant in the years immediately after 9/11. I knew that more Republican politicians in office would never lead to anything good for gay people, no matter what else happened. Around 2004, though, I decided that despite it being a political liability for those promoting other policies that I supported, it seemed that there were, in fact, a lot of people who wanted to get married to someone of the same sex. I had no reason to oppose it other than my attempt at pragmatism that it ultimately turns out I misjudged given that 58% of the population now supports it. So almost 10 years ago I changed my stance on it. Now we hear about new high-profile conversions constantly. Even one of my favorite senators, Mark Warner of Virginia, just announced he's in favor of legalizing same-sex marriage. In 2013, though, that risk-free decision may only be worthy of a golf clap. To be sure, there are still significant factions within the Republican Party who are against it. In fact, Mike Huckabee recently hinted that evangelicals would bolt from the Republican Party and maybe form their own party if the party went ahead and endorsed same-sex marriage. I highly encourage that, by the way, Mike. I don't think you have to be a hateful bigot just to be against it, but if it's important enough for you to form your own party based on it, I don't think your last name has to be Phelps for me to figure out what your objection is. No matter how much conservatives talk about standing on principle, we've seen that public opinion is weighing on them more every year, and this issue that they thought was their dream wedge issue is now splitting them down the middle, just like the immigration issue. The common thread to both of those issues is public opinion, and by doing our part in rejecting that agenda at the voting booth, the people standing in the way of social progress are seeing the evolve or become irrelevant ultimatum being handed down directly from the people. They can't get tax cuts for the wealthy passed if they're getting beaten on social issues. Yes, making politicians and even religions pay for their anti-humanity decisions is the way to get public policy accomplished. In this latest round on the issue, the Supreme Court will have their say about the Federal Defense of Marriage Act and California's Prop 8, and I don't know that I'm as confident about that outcome as I am about the will of the people themselves, or even state or federal legislatures at this point. But regardless of their decision, it's only a matter of time before the remaining opponents either support same-sex marriage or at least stop actively blocking it successfully, and progress will continue to full marriage equality. In another generation, we'll look at them similarly to how we look at people who were against interracial marriage. Just bizarre throwbacks to a bygone era, picketing Capitol Hill in their button-down shirts and sensible shoes in the 60s, holding signs about how society will never be the same. Just more proponents of small government once again deciding who you should love.